Universal Studios Florida. It's not a great park. I mean, it does have a good handful of solid experiences that I really like, some of which I even consider underrated, but as it evolved from Universal's flagship park and slowly replaced its classic rides with screens and simulators, it has just become more and more uninteresting to me. It's not to say that these types of attractions are necessarily bad, as for example, I think that Race Through New York with Jimmy Fallon is actually a fantastic simulator, but it gets a lot of hate because it premiered in that era where Universal kept replacing real, physical attractions with more screens. The park has a balance issue with not enough corporeal dark rides to offset the abundance of projected media everywhere, but as you've heard me explain throughout multiple videos, 2019 was a dramatic turning point for Universal. Starting with Hagrid's, Universal's ride design became phenomenal, really returning to meaningful physical effects, and while many other attractions have incorporated screens in their experiences since, their implementation has either been minimal or tasteful, moving away from the overstimulation of constant screen action. With Universal winning me back over because of this, I was very excited to hear the rumors of Epic Universe, and now with actual announcements, it really seems that Universal is going above and beyond here, continuing that strong attraction design going forward. I've been pretty optimistic that Universal would finally fix their studio park in Florida, and yet, 2023 brought us VillainCon, which replaced Shrek 4D, and I think might easily be the contender for worst attraction in the park. Yeah, I know that Fast and Furious is still here, but at least I enjoy it ironically. However, VillainCon is a bigger disappointment because it's just flat out boring, and really, this premiered at a time when Universal was pretty much just producing winners that were all remarkably impressive. I'll give credit to VillainCon, at least its idea is unique, and I liked that Universal was experimenting with something different, but the gameplay just isn't fun, and even a year later, it still doesn't perform well on a technical level. I'll say that I also enjoy the new Minion Cafe too, which is a nice update for the park, and does that new theme park thing of plussing cafeteria food with creative presentation, which I think is a positive trend, but if there's one thing that's obvious about this and VillainCon, it's that this was done on the cheap. While I'm generally of the opinion that the park's dedicated area for younger children, Kid Zone, was outdated, that brings us to the topic of today's video, which is its replacement. Known as DreamWorks Land, which just opened in June of 2024, it was clearly done quickly and on the cheap, and while this is generally a much more positive development than VillainCon, I don't think that it really lives up to the offerings of the former Kid Zone, or really, any of the areas for younger children over in Islands, which themselves are definitely some of the coolest kids areas ever built. It's unfortunate that more money wasn't put into this, even though it's just kind of sufficient, and while there are positive aspects that I like, I really hope that the studios gets real substantial investments in the future. DreamWorks is just kind of a mixed experience overall, one that doesn't really affect anyone's park day other than really small children and their parents. However, what makes this land interesting isn't necessarily what it is at face value, but rather that it's a really powerful marketing gimmick that will likely boost attendance at Epic Universe. I know that's a really strange statement to put out there, but let's actually take a look at what the land has to offer and see how it ties into the larger picture of where Universal is headed next. Despite my issues with the overall cheapness of this area, it does undeniably bring in a lot of people, naturally with many young kids, and when I went to experience it and get some footage for the video, it was actually overwhelmingly crowded. In order to produce this video, I had to return quickly at park open with a nasty sky, and much of the land backlit by the early morning sun, so I do want to give it credit and say that it looks better than some of what you'll see here on video. Starting from the entrance sign, which many people pointed out as a bad first impression because it's just done so cheaply, and I agree, you'll actually see the former Kid Zone around ET has gotten some general improvements. The former Kid Zone pizza ditched the abrasive red paint in favor of a DreamWorks cloud motif, now being renamed to the DreamWorks Imagination Cafe, and over by ET, the entrance has been rerouted with a great new sign, and the nearby bathrooms painted to represent the flying bike scene from the film. Just past the DreamWorks sign is a small pavilion for character meet and greets, and moving further in, you'll enter the first of 3 sections, this one themed to Shrek. The first thing you'll probably notice on your right is Shrek's hut, which is a really detailed set piece for a meet and greet. When Shrek 4D was still in the park, the best part of the attraction was actually the meet and greet across from the building, where you could encounter Shrek, Fiona, and a comedic donkey puppet that would harass park guests as they walked by. It's good to see that they now have a themed, dedicated space to do this, so that's a positive improvement for the park. Turning to the left, the land is flanked by Swamp Snacks, where you might have heard of the infamous Shrexel, but while I haven't tried anything from the booths in the land, I do appreciate the creative presentation of the food. Moving a bit further in on the left, there's King Harold's Swamp Symphony, an interactive feature of the land, where as you step on lily pads, the frogs sing with your input, which obviously seem to be popular with children. Another interactive feature is Mama Luna Feline Fiesta, which I believe comes from one of the Puss in Boots films, although I really have no context as to what this is. Inside this small building, you'll encounter a number of screens with cats lounging around the house, and as you play with interactive elements, such as ringing a bell or pressing a button to activate a fan, the cats will react in various comedic ways. I do actually find this to be pretty amusing, especially since it really captures the silliness of how cats can react to certain stimuli, so I think this is another positive aspect of DreamWorks. However, where the Shrek area fails to live up to expectations is the playground, which while it does have some interesting elements, like the slide where you go down through Shrek's outhouse, or the Pinocchio animatronic who talks to you when you ring a doorbell, the playground is otherwise really basic. It's just one short rope bridge and a few slides, and while there is also a splash pad nearby, I think that kids will likely get bored pretty quickly. Compare how basic and bare this is to Fievel's Playland and Kid Zone, which yes, while it was outdated, had many splash areas, rope nets, elaborate props, and even a water slide. Over in Islands, Zeus Landings If I Ran the Zoo is meant mostly for toddlers, but I can still appreciate how well themed it is, and enjoy that it has many interactive kinetic play features. Me Ship the Olive over in Tuna Lagoon is also really well themed for a play area, and of course, Camp Jurassic is probably the best of these that I've ever seen. It's massive, and a lot like Disney's Tom Sawyer Island, full of explorable areas and caves. However, it also contains extensive rope bridges, climbable obstacles, and other interactive features that actually make this place pretty fun for adults to explore too, rather than just chaperoning young kids, which makes for a great family activity where everyone is having fun. When you compare all of this to the playground in DreamWorks, you can see how cheap and quickly put together it is, having less features than a playground that you would find in a public park, which is really disappointing because I think I've shown that Universal has traditionally built the best themed playgrounds pretty much anywhere. I mean, it's serviceable, and kids will still have fun running around, but it's a lesser experience than what it replaced by a significant degree. To me, the Shrek area seems to have gotten the most focus in DreamWorks, and as you work your way back, it feels like the budget was stretched further and further. I know that's not how park design works, but it does become a lesser experience, and the theming diminishes as you travel to the back. Exiting Shrek, the next area is themed to Trolls. In a boombox-themed snack stand, a flashy menu board advertises ice cream cones, with enough food coloring to give you debilitating diarrhea, reportedly, and across the path, you'll see the High Five Hideaway, a small shop that sells DreamWorks merch. Attractions here include Poppy's Playground, which is mostly just circular structures that you can climb through, I guess. And where the Barney Fountain used to be for a Day in the Park with Barney show, it now features Poppy and Branch. Heading back towards the main path, Woody Woodpecker's Nuthouse Coaster was repainted, and some small theming elements were added, now becoming the Trolls Troller Coaster, which is also just kind of whatever, as the park didn't really gain anything here. Leaving the Trolls area and traveling to the back, the final segment of DreamWorks is based on Kung Fu Panda. Replacing Curious George Goes to Town, which was a water play area, you now enter Poe's Kung Fu Training Camp, which recycles the steel structures and really strips them down to minimal theming. Curious George was never great, but this is definitely a thematic downgrade. The area includes an interactive gong, some light splash pad elements, spinning carousels, and a large bucket that occasionally dumps water into a laundry-themed area. At the back of this pavilion is Poe Live, an interactive show where audience members engage with Poe on a screen as he teaches Kung Fu, achieved with a hidden actor who voices the character elsewhere. It seems fine for a cheap, low-effort show, but again, it's a downgrade from what was here before, as this was the former ball factory, a multi-level play area where you could collect foam balls and launch them at others. I'm sure that this was probably costly because balls likely had to be replaced often, and nobody really knew that this was back here either, but I can't say that Po Live really engaged the audience. Really, the entire Kung Fu Panda area took what was already here, stripped it down while retaining some water elements, and replaced a fun attraction with an interactive screen show. Back in 2021, when the mask mandates were in effect for the parks, a day in the park with Barney closed, I think likely because it both lost relevancy and the operating costs were too much in a park with reduced capacity. It was soon replaced with DreamWorks Destination, a very temporary dance party experience that featured custom franchise characters and seemed to be a low-budget hit. It seems that this was the foundation for the new repurposed theater for DreamWorks Land, which now has a new interesting paint job and is called Imagination Celebration. This new show stripped down the Barney Theater, replaced its park theming with cutouts and LED screens, and now has a story about two imaginative characters who look into the clouds and see their favorite heroes. It's essentially a scripted dance party, and to be fair, that's a lot of what Barney was too, but as these actors see characters in the clouds, the LEDs transform the setting, and those characters come out on stage, coordinating with the themes of DreamWorks Land. The first character segment features Shrek, which actually employs some interesting puppetry for Donkey and Dragon, which is then followed by Trolls, and then Kung Fu Panda. The show actually ends with an appearance from King Julian, so that shakes things up a bit, but otherwise, this is pretty disposable, meant to just throw stimulation at the audience and keep really young kids engaged with fun pop music. So that wraps up what DreamWorks Land has to offer, which, in my opinion, really is worse than what was here before, as I only think that a few elements of the Shrek area are really worth speaking about. The aesthetic of the land is mildly nice, and there are a few clever elements here and there, but we've seen that not only was Kid Zone much more interesting in its design, but it offered more to do as well, contrasting with DreamWorks, which is essentially either some really basic playgrounds or just more screens. Islands of Adventure also really does have some of the best play areas that you'll find anywhere too, so it's disappointing to see Universal really cheap out and not even attempt to reach the high standard that they've already set. All of this then raises the question though, why bother with DreamWorks Land at all? It's not really a revelation to say that toddler-aged children don't really have any standards for what they find entertaining, and recognizable characters definitely resonate with them. While I liked that Kid Zone definitely had more effort put into its offerings than DreamWorks, the pretty observable reality is that Fievel, Curious George, and Barney were just not relevant to kids any longer, and DreamWorks does accomplish the goal of updating the park with more relevant properties. In the past, I've made the argument that I'll enjoy an attraction for its design, rather than the relevance or strength of its IP, but in the case of DreamWorks, updating this area of the park to have characters recognizable to young kids is appropriate, and they won't know the discrepancy in quality from what was there before, or even be bothered to care if they did. So is this why Universal went cheap for this and VillainCon, because kids won't care anyways? Well, maybe, but I think it's pretty safe to assume that this all relates to Epic Universe. Long before any of the announcements, it was clear that this park was going to be wildly ambitious, and now that much has been revealed and there's still even more to come, I think it's pretty safe to assume that the ambition and cost of the park might rival 1980s Epcot or Tokyo Disney Sea. I might be wrong, of course, but Universal has really proven that they're attempting to launch a park that will shake the industry, and it has even caught the attention of people who have traditionally never even considered Universal over Disney. This is a critical period of time with a lot of consumer trust broken by Disney, either through their anti-consumer policies or the aggressive IP mandate applied to their parks, which often replaces well-loved attractions in favor of stuff that is fun and flashy, but doesn't really resonate the same way that many older classics have and still do. We've seen the quality just get worse and worse, often opting to do things as cheaply as possible, kind of like, well, DreamWorks Land, but in huge areas of their parks. At a time when people are either fed up with Disney or just generally losing interest, Epic Universe can very much change how people vacation in Orlando, turning Universal into a true multi-day resort, which has been aggressively expanding hotel capacity, and even offers its own world-class water park. I've listened to travel agents who have noted a significant increase in interest for Universal over the past few years, and while many travelers have traditionally stayed at Disney, tacking on a day or two at Universal for their trip, I think that Epic Universe is very much designed to change how people view the resort. Instead of staying primarily at Disney, where many see the value as having diminished considerably as prices continue to rise, Universal will now offer enough for a lengthy stay, flipping the equation with many people now staying on Universal property, possibly adding on a Disney park or two. What Epic Universe is also doing is attracting people through its IP with Nintendo and its extension of the Wizarding World, which, while I think it's unfortunate that people engage with theme parks in such a shallow manner, I do believe it will draw in a lot of people who would not have otherwise considered Universal before, but will now be exposed to the really strong attraction design that will keep them coming back, regardless of the IP attached to it. That's been the trend with Universal recently, so why are VillainCon and DreamWorks not up to that standard? Well, again, it's clear that Epic is one of the most ambitious parks ever created, and I have to imagine that the cost is astounding. If I'm reading between the lines correctly, I think it's likely that Universal wanted to keep offering new experiences for the studios to make it feel fresh, but with so much money going to the new park, it's likely that Universal wanted to keep costs down in the meantime. That's unfortunate, but I also understand why they wanted to throw in new areas targeted for kids in a way that was quick and cheap. People obviously perceive the Disney parks as being for younger children, and Universal more for families with older kids. That's an issue that I've highlighted with Universal before, as I pointed out how ironic it is that in the original park, E.T. was the only ride with a height requirement, but it's now seen as the most appropriate attraction for kids today, with many of the other attractions having more restrictive height requirements, or otherwise being too intense for really young children. Even Islands of Adventure, which I pointed out does have some great areas for kids, including pretty much all of Seuss Landing, is generally viewed as the thrill park. So when a family with young children is considering Epic Universe, and therefore a longer stay at Universal over Disney, the company is also promoting a new Minions Land with an accessible standing ride, and a whole area themed to DreamWorks with properties and activities that appeal to them, which I think will give many that push for a full stay at Universal. It's unfortunate that these projects were cheap and not very substantial, but I'm interested in how they're essentially just marketing gimmicks to change the perception of families with young children, pushing them towards giving Universal a try. The studios is still in a pretty bad place in my opinion, but I hope that once Epic opens, Universal really begins focusing on new major attractions for this park, which I believe will likely be the case. They've certainly recognized issues with their oversaturation of screen attractions elsewhere, so I have to imagine that they're well aware of the issues with this park too, and want to give it the investment that it needs, which is why I'm a lot more forgiving of VillainCon and DreamWorks, because they've otherwise proven that they want to do better. Overall, DreamWorks Land is a mixed experience, one which Universal didn't put much effort into, but has already proven popular with young children, and while I think they could do better, I at least understand that investment will likely be more substantial going forward, which keeps me optimistic. As always though, if you enjoy videos like these and would like to support the channel, one easy way to do that is to just leave a like. If you want to see more videos like these, I also recommend hitting the subscribe button with bell notification so as to be alerted to new videos as they release.